I think that's what the angels sound like, don't you? It's true. So we have 7 more days until Christmas, and we are walking through the Christmas story from a metaphysical perspective, looking at it as the story of our own spiritual unfoldment, as well as the steps that we take to manifesting our dreams in our life. We began the story with Mary, who was visited by the angel Gabriel and the Holy Spirit, and that's the first step on any journey, which is to state the intention, to plant the seed. And what Mary did was to keep her pregnancy a secret until she was sure that it was going to stay, and then she was ready to share it with the world. And so it is in our divine ideas, in our pursuing our dreams, in our creativity, in our spiritual practice. It is best when something is new to hold it close to our hearts, yeah? To keep it within and to share it with those whom we know are going to support it, as Mary did when she visited Elizabeth. The second step on the journey was the shepherds who were out in the fields watching their flock by night. The shepherds represent that part of us that watches over our thoughts and directs them. So last week we talked about the importance of watching our thoughts and not letting them wander off into limiting beliefs and not letting them wander off into negativity. So as we follow in the footsteps of the shepherds and we direct our thoughts positively, we can more easily take action toward manifesting one's dream. And the shepherds demonstrated this by when they received the call from the angel, they were right on it. They didn't waste any time. They just headed right over to that manger and saw that Christ child. They didn't talk about it. They didn't think about it. They didn't get lost. They headed straight to see the Christ child. And so it is with us. You know, when we get that moment of inspiration, if we've been doing our inner work, we can move on it. We can move on it quickly. Today I want to talk about where the wise men, particularly the star, and Herod, and how they fit into the Christmas story, because I think that Herod is a very important character, because it is a part of our character as well, and it's one that we kind of gloss over sometimes, and we don't really look at what does that mean, and who does he represent. So you know the scripture. The wise men saw the star, and they were probably most likely astrologers from Persia. The star was most likely a conjunction of planets. Being astrologers, they would know what the star meant. And so they followed this star, and they were seeking out the Christ child. Now, on their way, they ran into Herod, because Herod had also heard about the prophecies and about the Christ child being born, and Herod was threatened by this because he had a position of power, and he didn't want to lose it, and so he called the Magi to him, and he said, hey, so if you figure out where this child is born, would you come back and let me know, because I would like to worship this child as well? Which, of course, he was lying, but, you know, they didn't know that at the time. And Herod had called his astrologers and wise advisors, and they couldn't find the Christ child. So, you know the story where the wise men find the Christ child, and they bring gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they went home via a different route. And the scripture tells us that Herod was furious. In the book of Matthew, we read, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. So that's some pretty intense stuff there. That's really wanting to hold on to your power, that you would go to that drastic a move. So let us look at this story, and well, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? What does it have to do with Christmas? So when we look at the star can represent a couple of things. One is, I think it represents our purpose in life. when we get the image of the wise men following the star, it's the same kind of image of each one of us following our purpose. And as we talked about in the dream, unfoldment of the dream, it's so important that our dreams align with our purpose, yeah? So if the star then represents the purpose, if you look at your life and go back over it, you'll find that there's a thread that is pretty similar that runs through it. Do you not find that? So, when I was a kid, I always loved church. I didn't really listen to the minister. I had no idea what he was saying. It was the United Church of Christ. I found out later. But I loved singing the hymns. I loved looking at the stained glass windows. And I loved ritual. Ritual was just very fun for me. And I've shared this before, but I had a lot of kittens when I was little. And so I would take the kittens and lock them in the bathroom, and I would baptize all of them. Now, I did not do full immersion, but I did make, a little water and a little sign of the cross on each of their foreheads, because I knew the kittens would be going out into the world, and I had no power over what was going to happen to them, and that was the best that I felt that I could do for them, other than going door to door and asking if people wanted a kitten, but just doing that blessing. And so there's been a thread that has run through my life in that I love ritual, and I've always loved spiritual practice, and I love God, and it takes different forms. It was yoga for a while, it's unity, and has been unity for 25, 30 years now. So what is that thread that is always weaving through your life? Because if you think about the wise men, they were looking up at that star and they were following that star, and that inner star is our compass. It's our true north. And as long as we are heading in that direction, we are not only manifesting our dreams, but we are awakening to our purpose in life and awakening to the birth of that Spirit of God. We're awakening to the Christ, yeah? So, the other image then of the star is spiritual practice. And the spiritual practice runs through all these stories. Mary kept her pregnancy secret. The shepherds, obviously they're out in the night watching the flocks. They were very comfortable with silence. And the wise men following the star, there's this, when you look at the stars, what do? You have to look up, right? You have to put your consciousness somewhere else. And it is through that spiritual practice of meditation and of focusing on God that sort of opens the door for us. It opens our brains in a way. I was reading a book called How God Changes Your Brain, written by two neuroscientists. And I want to share with you what the authors say about this. Contemplating God will change your brain. But I want to point out that meditating on other grand themes will also change your brain. If you contemplate the Big Bang, or immerse yourself in the study of evolution, or choose to play a musical instrument, you'll change the neural circuitry in ways that enhance your cognitive health. But religious and spiritual contemplation changes your brain in a profoundly different way, because it strengthens a unique neural circuit that specifically enhances social awareness and empathy while subduing destructive feelings and emotions. So if you wanted proof as to why you need to meditate and be in silence, now you got it. This is precisely the kind of neural change we need to make if we want to solve the conflicts that currently affect our world. And the author goes on to say, on another page, that what you choose to meditate on or pray for can do more than change your brain. You can also damage it, especially if you choose to focus on something that makes you frightened or angry. In psychology, this is called rumination. In a Stanford brain scan study, people who focused on negative aspects of themselves or a negative interpretation of life generated waves of fear and released a torrent of destructive neurochemicals into the brain. Which leads me to the next part of the Christmas story, which is Herod. Okay, So we have the wise men. They're following their purpose, they're following their dream and what they're supposed to be here. Just like us, we're following our dreams, we're following our purpose. They're doing their spiritual practice. They're looking at the stars. They're merging with the cosmos and with spirit. And then they run into Herod. And Herod, within us, represents the ego. And what is the ego? It is those things that we attach to. It is the things that make us afraid, that we believe that we are. So when we think of ego, sometimes we think of pride and arrogance, like, oh, that person has such an ego. But the truth is that destructive and self-negative talk is also the ego. So when we put ourselves down and go, hey, I'm not good enough, or whether we're like, hey, I'm great, either one of those is a little bit out of balance. And that's when we're on the path, when we're on the spiritual journey, when we're pursuing our dream, and the ego jumps in and it gets in the way of our pursuing our dreams. Now, I was looking at Eckhart Tolle, because he's kind of an expert on the ego, and he said, the difference between us and an animal is that we have egos. So when you look at your dog or your cat or your bird or whatever, it doesn't have an ego, right? I mean, the dog doesn't really know that it's a dog, and the dog doesn't look in the mirror in the morning and say, hey, my hair is a little messed up, or I put on a few pounds, I better back off on the kibble here, right? The dog is in its dogginess. The cat is in its kittiness. And that's wonderful. They're at one with who they are. We're not so lucky because we have to consciously do it. It's a blessing that we have this ego because it's what defines us and what brings us into this body and interacts in the world. It is our attachment to it that can get us in trouble. So if you'll notice that Herod could not find the Christ child. He was so into his power and position, he couldn't find the Christ child. Have you noticed that whenever you're into your power, too much into power or position or your viewpoint, that it's hard to touch into that Spirit of God within, isn't it? It's hard to feel the compassion. It's hard to feel that connectedness that we all feel with one another. Eckhart Tolle said that the ego is like a hard shell, like an armor that we put around us. And what it does is it can create separation. If we believe that that's where we end and we don't move beyond that, it creates separation, like I'm different, I'm better, I'm not so good, I'm whatever. And it can throw us off our path. It can throw us off our dream by saying, you're not good enough. You're too old, or you're too young, or you're whatever. That's the ego voice that is talking to us. And you know that the ego has jumped in if you find that you're easily offended, or you find yourself complaining a lot. That's the voice of the ego that comes in, that is creating and seeking separation. Because as long as the ego is in charge, it doesn't have to worry about a thing, right? And Herod never does find this Christ child. He doesn't. And as long as we are in our egos, we will not find it. So when I look at this story on so many levels, from the star to our purpose, to our spiritual practice, to our egos, how do we put it all together? So we've been talking about dreams this year and the different dreams that our community has had. And we've seen and celebrated many dreams together. And I want to briefly touch on one of the dreams of our community, and that is Paul Carr, who wrote a Christmas book called Santa's First Magical Ride, and it's autographed and in the bookstore today. And he said that he wrote the book because he was asked the question by children, well, where did Santa Claus come from anyway? And who are the elves? And how does Santa get around? And how did that whole thing happen? And Paul said that he sat down and I think wrote it in like 4 days. It just sort of came out of him. And it's one long rhyme. And I just want to share with you a little bit of it because it explains where Santa Claus comes from. The universe is more than space, in fact. It's bigger than any place that you will ever see or know. It's up above and down below. It circles round and about and tumbles in and bumbles out, and it contains all sorts of things: hobby horses, giant rings, and many beings large and small, and some that we can't see at all. Far off beyond the land of night, farther than the farthest light that we can see from this green earth, is the land of Santa's birth. He wasn't born as Santa Claus. He only got that name because, well, if you listen carefully, you'll know the answer. Wait and see. He comes from quite a magic place, a land called Yule, far off in space. And it goes on that Santa came from a planet called Yule, and the elves are from there, and it's a wonderful story. And I share it with you because it's Christmas, but also because it's a manifestation of a dream. And the way we manifest our dreams is we look at what is our purpose. And perhaps writing is something that runs through your life. Perhaps writing is a thread that continues. We follow the star, we watch our thoughts, and we move into manifestation, whether it shows up as a song or a meal or a child or a book. We celebrate that also this Christmas. So when we use the part of our brain that contemplates God, that contemplates the universe, I think one of the things that it does is it allows us to step back from who we are, and it gives space, yeah? And I was listening to Jim Carrey speak, and he said that before he was hired as an actor, he used to sit in his car overlooking Mulholland Drive. And he would just look out at this vast expanse, and he would begin imagining all kinds of things for himself. He would just imagine his life and all the goodness that was there waiting for him. And he took it a step further, and he apparently wrote himself a check for $10 million and put it in his wallet. And he said he would come back from that ride, that point where he spent a lot of time. And when he would come back, nothing had changed, but he said he felt happy. And he felt great. And he felt like it's out there. The possibility is out there. He just needs to do the work. Now, that's the thing. We can do our visualization, we can do our prayers, but we also need to take steps to follow that, right? 10 years from writing that check, he was paid $10 million for starring in Dumb and Dumber. It's kind of weird. But what I want to speak to is the space, that space. You know that the ego has stepped in when things are starting to stick to you, yeah? Whether it's your job or your relationship, and it's like things are sticking. I know that I need to step away from the church when the only thoughts I have are church thoughts. When the church starts to stick to me, it's like, okay, I need to step aside, because what happens is the ego starts to identify with that. So the Christmas story is our story. From the beginning of Mary and stating her intention, to the shepherds watching their thoughts and directing them in a positive direction, to the wise men who are not only following their purpose, but engaging in a spiritual practice that changes their brain. And if you'll lower the screen, so that when they meet Herod on the road, they know how to sidestep him. Now, I've shared a lot of the Christmas story, and so what I have for you is a little summary of the Christmas story as if it were being told today. That's how it would be if it was today, right? So know that the story of Christmas is not just a story that we tell year after year and has no meaning. It is the story of our spiritual unfoldment. It is the story of how our dreams manifest in our life. Join us Wednesday and Saturday night for our candle lighting, when we bring all the pieces of the story together, and on Christmas Day where we rest and celebrate the birth of the Christ. Thank you.